In my hand, I have a ball.
I just love the game.
Well, I've never been a millionaire, but I've lived like one all my life.
Now, I made the right decision going to teaching because, you know, the old saying, you know, those that can do, those that can't teach, you know.
I'm not going to go to university. I'm not one for the books. I had no academic passion at all, so to speak. So I decided it was going to be golf.
1969. The entire Ryder Cup is all square. On the 18th tee, just two players left out on the golf course, Tony Jacklin and Jack Nicklaus. They both drive on the fairway, they both hit their seconds onto the green. Jacklin hits his putt up to 2 feet. Nicklaus rushes his ball past the hole about 4.5 feet. He knocks it in just like the great championeers would do. Tony Jacklin is ready to knock the putt in, but as Jack Nicklaus reaches for his ball out the hole, at the same time he picks up Tony Jacklin's marker and concedes the putt. That has been named the concession, one of the great sporting gestures of all time. This golf course pays tribute to that wonderful moment in golf that shows us just what makes golf such a special game. The golf course here is designed by the great Jack Nicklaus along with Tony Jacklin. Tony Jacklin, he had style, he had charisma, and he was a champion golfer. He won the 1969 Open Championship, the 1970 US Open, and probably another 30 other tournaments around the world. But it was his timing that was important. He came along and completely changed golf in Britain and Europe forever. He took the tour by the scruff of the neck and he made golf popular not only amongst professional golfers, but also amateur golfers. And he rejuvenated the European Tour and he also rejuvenated the Ryder Cup. Tony Jacklin was a man that made a huge difference to the game of golf. Tony, as a youngster in England in the 60s, golf wasn't the game of choice for many people. How did you get into the game?
Well, I can remember it like it was yesterday. We had a neighbour. I lived in Scunthorpe with my parents. My dad was a steel worker. He drove a locomotive on the steelworks. And this guy, Eric Marquis, he was our immediate neighbour in this semi-detached house. I can remember him one afternoon saying to my dad, I went to this try golf yesterday, Arthur. He said, do you fancy coming? And my dad said, yeah, I'll come and have a go. And he went in and told my mother that he'd be back in an hour, you know, typical story. And so 4 hours later, dinner's in the oven, and that was the start of it. And I would be about 8 then. It would be the summer of, I'd be 8 or 9, the summer of 52, somewhere in there. And of course, it wasn't long before I joined him and pulled a trolley, and when we got out of the members' eyes, had a go. And in those days, you could buy nearly every sale room had hickory clubs in the corner, you know, and that's how I started. We got hickories and cut them down. You could easily just take the grip off, saw a bit off, put the grip back on, and you were home free, you know. So that was it. And the pro would be not being unkind, but he would be about 8 handicap. He was a pro in the afternoon and the superintendent in the morning, looked after the course. So I was self-taught, you know. I taught myself by watching, and I just loved the summers, and you know, I used to go out there and just stand and hit balls all day, trying to use my imagination, and helped him actually cutting the greens and stuff in the morning. I was part of the furniture out at the golf club in those long summer evenings especially.
Were there any other kids that have become well known that you used to play junior golf with?
There was another junior, a member at the club. By the time I got to 13, there were and I won my first Lincolnshire Junior Championship. There were 8 entered. There were only 8 kids entered in that. And Lincolnshire was the second biggest county in England at the time. So, you know, it was a unusual thing to be doing, I'm sure. And I can remember being very self-conscious if you were ever sort of seen away from the golf club with your golf clubs. I mean, if you walk down the high street or something like that with a golf umbrella, everybody sort of, you know, what's that? And so golf was, you know, it wasn't the most popular of games in that part of the world anyway. And we didn't have that many great golf courses. Woodhall Spa would be the best Lincolnshire golf course, and probably still is to this day.
Now, as a kid, when you were sort of 12 or 13 years old, did you ever think about becoming a professional golfer, that it was going to be your future?
Not realistically, I didn't know. I mean, but I used to, as I say, using my imagination when I hit all of those balls and practiced. In order to do that, I knew about guys like Ben Hogan and Sam Snead, and I used to visualize them criticizing my shots, you know, what would they think of that one, kind of thing. Oh yeah, he would like that, you know. So I would put myself in these situations, and by the time I got to 13, it was when you know, I started to really improve. I got my handicap down to 12, and I was 4 handicap at 14, and I was playing for the county, Lincolnshire County team then, and left school at 15, and of course it was in that era, my parents thought you have to have a trade behind you, you know, and of course there were 11,000 people in those steelworks from Scunthorpe at the time, and that's where I ended up briefly as an apprentice fitter. And that's where my parents wanted me. I hated it, you know, clocking in at 7:30 in the morning, got an hour for lunch, and I used to get on my bike and cycle to the golf club, hit balls for half an hour and cycle back to clock in again at 1 o'clock. We got 12 to 1 for lunch, and then unbeknownst to my parents, during that year, I applied for a couple of jobs. The first one I applied for was in Bakersfield, California. I just wanted out, you know. I used to get Golf Illustrated. It was the magazine. Tom Scott, I remember knowing him well in my early professional life. But I kept applying for these different jobs, and I applied with Bill Shanklin at Potters Bar Golf Club in North London, and got a call back, you know, come for an interview. And so then I came clean to my father and said, look, Dad, I've been writing these letters and this fella's offered me an interview, would you take me? Well, it was 150 miles to London from where we lived. And my dad only had pre-war cars, you know, he was always under cars, messing about. And it was a bit of a trek down there, you know. It took 3.5, 4 hours in this old banger. Anyway, he agreed to take me, and I said, if you don't like what you hear, you know, I won't do it. And and Bill Shanklin was something else. I mean, he was a rugby player. He captained Australian rugby in the 30s. And he was as tough as old boots. I mean, and I can see him sitting there now. He said, well, you do well here. He said, I've had 35 assistants through here. And we were really impressed by that. But I'd not even thought about it. I thought, later on, after I'd started, I thought, now I know why he's had 35 assistants through here. None of them could stand it for more than a few months. You know, they wanted out as soon as they saw how tough he was, and but I went and started on the 1st of January 1962, it was like St. Moritz. There was 2 feet of snow on the ground. And my dad drove me all the way back down there. And this was goodbye. You know, I had a suitcase, I had £5, a suit and a few shirts, and that was it. And I'd got these digs at Mrs. Baker's, right on the main line railway that goes through Potter's Bar. Her husband did a bit of caddying at the club. And she said, well, I'll put him up for a week. Well, it lasted 7 years. I used that as a base, even after I got married. But he wanted to send us back home, you know, because of the snow. And I said, this is it, you know, this is a big goodbye as far as my parents were concerned. And so reluctantly, he kept me there, but he knew that there was not much to do until the snow cleared, which of course it inevitably did. And I started life, and I daren't ask him for a day off. He never offered me one, and I worked 7 months without a day off, a single day off. And, you know, you got to put yourself, in those days, we didn't have a phone at our house. So I was communicating with parents, writing letters, and they did visit in the summer once. But that's where it all started. I played in the Middlesex, the professional event that year, and actually finished second or third in the professional event, but I won the assistants thing. And that's where it really all started. Eric Hayes, who was the boss of Dunlop, rang Bill Shanklin and said they wanted to give me a new set of clubs. Well, I'd never had a set of clubs, a full set, irons and woods as well. And, you know, I was quite excited about that. But I remember being in the back shop and Shanko being on the phone, and he said, don't spoil him, Eric, you know, don't spoil him. You know, he wanted to. And when I won that thing, you know, I got back to the club the next day. He said, you did all right yesterday, but you were lucky, weren't you? You know, there was always that sniping. He was a tough cookie, and I sussed him out early on because he was renowned as a good teacher. But one day he would go out and say, you know, pull with your left hand, and the next day he would say hit with your right, and he'd change the rules throughout, you know. And I just decided I was going to go my own way anyway.
You mentioned Bill Shanklin was tough, but both his kids became great teachers.
Yeah, well, you know, Bill was a real people person. He was a great talker, a great salesman, and I guess, you know, some of that rubbed off on the boys. Craig was a nice man. I met Craig in the late 60s here in America, and Dale was an assistant there with me, and they both had the part of that, their dad's personality. Certainly, he stamped his stock well. They looked a lot like him. Craig, especially as he got older, looked like his dad.
In the sort of early middle 60s, you started to play professional golf. You started to want to play for a living, and you travelled out to South Africa a few times.
Well, I did. It didn't take long. After that first summer, I was the only assistant there. I was closing his shop at night at 8 o'clock, and you know, he would come in the next morning and whinge about something, and it didn't. We had a flare up, and I told him, tears running down my face. I said, you know, I wouldn't work for you for £100 a week, and you know, I was really got upset, and he was in a huff and said fine, but you know, basically I'd know where to go. I mean, the next day, lo and behold, the president of the club came and requested to play with me. And Johnny Rubens was his name, and he was a very wealthy man. We played 2 or 3 holes, and he said, you know, how's your boss treating you? And I blurted it all out, you know, that that was it. And this would be in September time. And he said, well, what are you going to do this winter? And I said, well, I thought I want to play golf. I want to play tournament golf. And I thought I might try and go down to South Africa. And he said, well, how much is that going to cost? I said, Well, I've worked it out as best as I can, and I think it's about £600 for the 8 weeks of golf. And he said, well, how are you going to pay for it? I said, well, I don't know really. I said, I'd saved £347 in the time I'd been there. And he said, I'll tell you what we'll do. If you put £200 in, I'll put £200 in, and I'll call Dunlop for you, this Eric Hayes at Dunlop, and see if they'll put £200 in. I said, would you do that? He said, yeah, I'll do that for you. So that was my first trip to South Africa, and I had no problem spending the £600, of course, and I won a grand total of 35 after those 8 events. But the experience, I mean, obviously, I missed a lot of cuts, and on the surface of it, there was very little prize money anyway, but 35 was abysmal. 35 quid, for 8 weeks' work was not getting it done. But the experience stood me in good stead, and I actually came back to England the next year and won the Assistants Championship, Coombe Hill Assistants, and started to get confidence and gain ground, playing with better players. And I played in the Open that Bob Charles won in '63, made the cut there, and really my game started to develop. I finished 30th in that Open, and just making enough along the way to keep paying the bills. We're looking at an era now where bed and breakfast was 22 and 6. £1, 2 and 6, you could get bed and breakfast on the road. So you're only looking at expenses of sort of £10 a week. Mind you, the prize money, that 30th place in that Open in '63 won me a £15 cheque. I had to borrow money to get back home on the train. So you were in an era where there was just very, very little money.